So the Lian O11 Dynamic Evo XL is here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to put all the parts I've got in front of me together today to come up with a fully working PC by the end of the video. As well, I'm going to be taking a really detailed look at the case, pointing out all the new features that the case has to offer. So taking a look at the parts I'm going to be building with today. For the motherboard, I'm going to be using the ASRock X670E Taichi Carrara. For the CPU, I'm going to be using AMD's Ryzen 9, the 7900X. Keeping our CPU cool, I'm going to be using a 360mm IO from Lian. It's the Galahad 2 Trinity SL-INF. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Kingston Fury Renegade DDR5 at 7200 megatransfers per second. For storage, I'm going with a single Gen 5 NVMe M.2 drive for this build. It's from Crucial and it's their blistering fast T700. Powering the whole build, I've got a fully modular gold power supply from Montech. It's their Titan Gold. For the graphics card, I'm going to be using the Gigabyte Aorus Master RTX 4070. For case fans, I'm going to be using Lian's SL-INF 120 uni fans, and I've got a mixture of standard and reverse fans. So although this case will accommodate up to three 140mm fans at the top, at the side and at the bottom, the reverse fans that I want to use only come in 120mm sizes. So I'm really down to check these fans out, so that's the reason I'm using them today. But what I will do in the thermal testing, I will show you the 140mm fans so you can see what they look like and how they perform and decide which you prefer to use. And then the final part for today's build is some cable extensions in white. Okay, that's all the parts, let's get building. So I'm going to be covering the case in quite a bit of detail, much more than what we need to do the build I'm planning on to today. And the reason for this is if you want to deviate away from what I'm planning on doing, you should still be able to do it with this build guide. So the first thing I want to do is get our tempered glass panel removed. It is held on with a security screw for transport, so we're going to need to make a start by removing the top panel. To remove our case's top panel, we've got a captive thumb screw at the back, which we need to loosen. Then we're going to be able to pull the panel backwards and lift up and away. So we take a look at the back of the panel we just removed. You'll notice there's no dust filter on the underside of it. But in the case accessory box, we do get a magnetic dust filter, which you can slot into place at the top. So I'm planning on installing my IO at the top of the case set to exhaust, so I'm not planning on installing this optional dust filter. So at the top of the case, we've got two security screws which are in place to stop the tempered glass panels coming out during transport. These are completely optional. When you finish the build, you can put them back in. If you don't put them in, you are going to be able to pull both the side and front tempered glass panel off with the top panel in place. So with the security screws at the top removed, we can simply pull the tempered glass panel out from the top and lift away. And it's exactly the same thing with the front tempered glass panel. So this front pillar is actually removable, and I think this is going to really improve the aesthetics of the build because it's going to give the appearance of the tempered glass panels joining together. So it is held on with 4 screws, 2 at the bottom and 2 at the top. So obviously with the front pillar removed and the tempered glass panels not in place, you're going to need to take care not to press down on the top of the case. And Lian do recommend if you're going to be transporting the case, you should put this pillar back in for transportation. So I've put the tempered glass panels back into place and you can see what I'm talking about in terms of the aesthetics. It looks like these two tempered glass panels just joined together here. We've still got the white at the bottom and the top on both the side and the front, but this is completely seamless and I think it really is going to improve the look of the build. To remove our other side panel, there's a little notch at the back you can get your thumb into, and then it's just a matter of lifting it up and away. So again, taking a look at the back of this panel, there's no dust filters installed over the mesh areas by default, but in the case accessory box there is 2 magnetically attached dust filters which we can simply slot into place. So I am planning on having the side of the case set to intake, so I'm going to be leaving these in place. On the bottom of the case, we've got another dust filter which can simply be pulled out from the side for cleaning. On our other front panel, we've got our power button and it can be pressed both from the front and the side. We've got our reset button and then we've got the button to control the case's built-in ARGB effects. So the M button cycles through the various modes and the C button cycles through the colors. Because just like the smaller version of the O11 Dynamic Evo, we have got this ARGB lighting bar running the full length of the front tempered glass panel. And the rest of our front I/O is installed down at the bottom on the front of the case, where we've got a combined headphone and microphone jack. We've got 4 USB Type A ports. It's just important to make sure that you want to use all 4 of these, that your motherboard has 2 USB 3.0 headers, and we've got a single Type C port. So just like the O11 Dynamic Evo, it is possible to move this I/O module, and in this case it can be moved to the side and to the rear. So to move our I/O module, there's a little clip on the top, and all we need to do is pull this forward and lift the I/O module up to free it up. And you'll see we've got some additional clips here on the side of the case. So it's just a matter of moving the I/O module forward, and we might need to pull a little bit of extra cable through to reach up towards the side. And then all we need to do is line the module up with the holes in the case, and this time we're going to pull it forward and it's going to lock into place. So that's what the I/O module is going to look like on the side of the case. So it is also possible to move the I/O module towards the rear of the case, but we're going to need to loosen up this clip holding the cables in place at the bottom. So we can free up the I/O module by pushing the little clip forward and then pulling it towards ourselves. And now then we're going to be able to move it towards the rear of the case. And again, it's just a matter of lining things up and then pushing into place. So you'll notice we've got a little screw hole here. So it's just a matter of moving the cables down this way, lining them up with the hole, and then popping the screw back into place. And that's what the I/O module looks like on the rear of the case. I think I definitely prefer it at the front, so I'm going to put it back to the stock configuration. Moving on to fan and radiator support, and the case does put its increased size to good use compared to the original O11 Dynamic Evo, and at the bottom, the side and the top, you can mount up to 3 140mm fans or up to a 420mm radiator at each of the 3 places. Of course, you can still mount 3 120mm fans or a 360mm radiator if you prefer. So if, like me in this build, you wanted to go with 3 120mm fans at the side, you might worry they might not look great because there is space for 3 140mm fans. So Lian Lee have thought about this, and they include these little cover plates to block off the spaces that you're not going to be using. So you can see there's little notches here and here for these to slip into, so it's just a matter of slotting the plate into here and then clipping into here. And then it's going to be the same thing at the top. And then if we slot our fans back into place, you'll see this does a great job of improving the aesthetics. And the other thing, hopefully by blocking off these unused spaces, it will also help promote airflow in the case. It is possible to put 2 of these at the bottom, and then if we slot the fans back into place, so again, this may work particularly well if you're going with a really thick radiator at the bottom. Likewise, it is possible to have 2 of them at the top, and if you were going with a really thick push-pull configuration at the top, this would definitely look better. As you'd expect in this case, we do have removable fan brackets at the top, on the side, and at the bottom. So to remove the bottom fan bracket, there's 2 screws at the front we're going to need to remove. And then we're going to be able to pull the fan bracket towards the front of the case and lift it up and away. With the fan bracket on the top of the case, it's a similar story. There's 2 screws we need to remove. And again, we're then going to be able to pull the bracket towards the front of the case and lift away. So because we are going to be able to mount our graphics card upright on the side bracket, there is a securing thumb screw on it that we are going to need to remove. Then with our thumb screw removed, all we're going to need to do is push this little lever upwards, and that's going to free our bracket up, and we're going to be able to slide it back towards us to remove it from the case. So it is possible to install this bracket in 2 different orientations. So you can see in this particular orientation, we are going to have space for a set of fans behind the bracket, but if we turn it round this way and then pop it back into place, you can see the bracket is then going to be quite flush up against the side panel. So this is then going to give you more space on this side of the case, and which orientation you use just depends on how you want to show off your hardware. At the rear of the case, you can install either 1 or 2 120mm fans, although to get the 2 120mm fans in, you are going to have to move the motherboard tray down to its lowest setting, and that's the only setting that you're going to be able to install the 2 fans at the rear, and more on moving the motherboard tray in a minute. So in terms of motherboard support, as you'd expect in a case of this size, it supports motherboards up to AITX in size. And if you want to go with a CPU architecture, the maximum height supported is 167mm. So as I've mentioned, it is possible to move this motherboard tray either up or down depending on how you want to build in the case. And out of the box, the case comes with the motherboard tray installed in the middle position. So in this position, the maximum height of fans and radiators at the top of the case is 82mm, while at the bottom it's up to 90mm. So to free the motherboard tray up from the case, there's 2 captive thumb screws on the right hand side that we need to loosen, and then we've got 2 non-captive thumb screws at the back we need to remove. And then we can slide the motherboard tray to the front to remove it from the case. So one of the really cool things this is going to let you do is install your motherboard to the bracket outside the case, and if you want you can even install your graphics card as well before slotting everything back into the case. So if we wanted to move our motherboard up towards the top of the case, we'd need to remove this bracket here. We can take it down to the bottom and slot it into place and then replace the thumb screw. And if we take a look at the back of the case, you'll notice we've got 3 different positions at the bottom and the top for installing the motherboard back into place. So all we would need to do is when we install it in, we're going to want to line it up with the top screws. Just while we're here, I want to point out the really large rubber grommets that we have in place. So your cables are going to be well hidden no matter which of the 3 settings you go for. And you'll notice that we've got 3 holes in the back of the case and a little notch on the motherboard tray, which helps hold it in place before you get the thumb screws in to secure it. So this is what the motherboard tray looks like in the top position. And you can see the big advantage of this is you're going to have much more space down at the bottom of the case. And what this has basically done is move things up by 36 millimeters. So at the bottom of the case now, you've got up to 126 millimeters of height for your fans and radiators, while at the top of the case, the space has been reduced down to just 46 millimeters. So if you do want to install your motherboard in the lowest position, which as I've mentioned is the only one that lets you get 2 120 millimeter fans installed at the rear, we're simply going to need to move these 2 brackets up to the top. So again, this is what our motherboard looks like in its lower setting, and again this moves the motherboard down by 36 millimeters. So at the top of the case we've now got up to 118 millimeters of height for your fans and radiators, but the big compromise is down at the bottom where we've only got 54 millimeters at the bottom of the case. So as I mentioned, this is the only configuration we're going to be able to mount 2 120 millimeter fans at the rear of the case. You can see we've got the holes at the bottom here, and these 2 brackets give us the space between the top fan holes, and then we can set our fans into place and they're going to line up with the holes in the case. Moving on to mounting your graphics card in the case, and you've got 3 options. You can mount your graphics card horizontally. If you want to mount it vertically, you need to pick up Lian Li's universal 4-slot vertical GPU kit. I don't have this, so I'm not able to show you this today. And again, like the O11 Dynamic Evo, you can mount your graphics card in the upright position. And there's a new bracket and a 900mm riser cable designed specifically for this case, which is going to simplify the installation process and give you a few additional options as well. And I'll show you that in a minute. So in terms of mounting your graphics card horizontally, there's absolutely loads of room in this case with a maximum length of 460mm being supported. At the rear of the case, we've got 8 horizontal PCI expansion slot brackets. They're grouped in 2 groups of 4. To access the top slots, we need to remove this thumb screw. And then we're going to be able to open this bracket. And one of the really cool things is it is magnetically attached. So you can see the little magnets here. So at the moment it's locked in the open position, and when we close it, it locks in the closed position, and you're just using the thumb screw to secure it. So we take a closer look at the bracket, you'll see why there's a strong magnet on it. And the reason is you're actually going to be able to install your graphics card toollessly. So you're just going to remove the slot covers that you don't want. And I think the reason they're grouped into 4 is so they all don't fall out when you open the bracket. You're then going to be able to slot your graphics card into place, and these little notches are going to go through the graphics card, hold it in place, and then you can simply close this little bracket again, and that's going to keep your graphics card secured. So if you do decide to install your graphics card in the horizontal position, Lian Li include this really nice GPU support bracket, which I'll show you now how to install. How you install it depends on whether you're going with a standard ATX or eATX motherboard. So we'll show you with the ATX motherboard first of all. So assume you've installed your motherboard, you're going to secure it with the standard screws, but these 2 standoffs you're not actually going to put a screw in, you're going to put a long standoff in place. So like I say, assume we've got a motherboard in here, and we're just going to take these long standoffs and screw them into place. And in the case accessory box, we get the tool for securing the standoffs. We can then set the GPU support bracket into place, and then we'll secure it with 2 of these screws. Then we can set this little bracket into place, and we'll secure it into place with a screw. And then we can add a rubber pad to the top of the bracket. So how this little bracket is going to work is you're going to install your graphics card, and then all you're going to do is press this little button in, which frees this bracket to move up, and then when you let the bracket go, it locks into place, and that then is going to secure your graphics card in place. So if you're going with an ATX motherboard, you're going to need to use this additional bracket. So we've got this little clip to go on at the top. There's a small hole and then a screw hole. And then if we turn things around, we're going to put one of these small screws in through the hole here. On the bottom of the bracket, it's exactly the same thing. We're going to set another one of these into place. And again, we'll pop another small screw into the bracket. So this time we're going to set the bracket into place. It just slides over the two standoffs before installing our motherboard. We've then got these two plastic spacers, which are just going to go over the bracket. We're then going to go ahead and install our motherboard as normal, and we'll use the standard motherboard screws to go through the motherboard and into the standoffs. We're then going to be able to set our GPU support bracket into place, and we'll screw it in with two of the larger screws from the GPU support bracket box. And this is going to work in exactly the same way as what I showed you before with the ATX configuration. The only thing is the bracket is installed further towards the front of the case, giving you more space for your eATX motherboard. And again, just press the bracket to slide it up to where it needs to go and let go and it'll stay in place. So now I want to talk you through mounting your graphics card in the upright position. One of the big advantages of this case, rather than the original O11 Dynamic Evo, is you are going to be able to mount it to this removable bracket, rather than in the O11 Dynamic Evo you're mounting it to the top of the case. So you can actually take this bracket out and do what I'm showing you now on a table. I do get a better angle with the case standing up, so that's the only reason I'm showing you it this way. So if we take a look at the back of the bracket, you notice there's two holes on each side here, and we've got a range of holes at the top of the case. So it's just a matter of sliding the bracket into place, which of the three positions you want to install your graphics card in. And this is obviously going to be affected by the length of your graphics card. So I think I'm just going to install it in the middle position, and then we just need to use four of the short screws that come with the upright GPU kit to secure it in place. At the bottom of the bracket, we've got four different holes for installing this bracket that's going to help secure the card at the bottom. Now, I've sized my card up and I think I'm going to install it in the bottom holes. So we did want to install fans behind the GPU. Now would be a good time to set them into place. And this is what three 140mm fans is going to look like. So we take a look in from the other side. You see we are going to have access to most of the holes on the fans. The only one I think I wouldn't be able to get a screw into is this hole down at the bottom. Problem is, had I installed the fans first, then I wouldn't be able to screw these brackets in from the other side. You can see here, there'd be no access to these screw holes with the fans installed. So I think it would make sense to install the brackets first and then the fans. And if you go with something like Lian Uni fans, you're not going to need to put all the screws in anyway. So although I do get a better angle to show you things with this installed in the case, I've got a big graphics card, so I'm going to remove the bracket from the case because installing it is going to be much easier. So then I can go ahead and set the graphics card into place, and then we'll secure it with two of the screws that came with the bracket. We're going to add this little bracket to secure the graphics card at the other end. So the first thing we're going to do is apply the rubber pad. We're then going to slide the bracket into place. We're going to pull it back to where it is supporting the graphics card. Now this is an absolutely massive graphics card. I've installed it in the slot closest to the bracket, and you can see it's just about fitting on. If you had a much thinner graphics card, what you could do is actually install this the other way round, so it was all the way up here, and if you were doing it that way, you would stick the little rubber pad on this side. So we'll slide it into place. That feels about right there, and then we'll secure it into place with a screw. So to mount the graphics card, we get this really long 900mm riser cable. And what we're going to want to do is feed the riser cable through this little gap on the bracket. So I'm just trying to secure this, but unfortunately with the graphics card already secured in the bracket, I'm struggling to get this cable plugged in. So what I think you're probably best doing is actually installing this cable on the graphics card and then passing the cable through the bracket and then installing the graphics card to the bracket. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the graphics card so I can get this plugged in. Okay, so that's the graphics card freed up from the bracket. We can line the cable up with the graphics card and push it into place. And then all we're going to need to do is re-secure the graphics card to the bracket. So it should now just be a simple matter of sliding the bracket back into the case. So in terms of securing the graphics card in the case, the bracket does seem to be doing a great job. It's nice and secure. So in terms of routing this absolutely massive cable, there looks to be a nice little cutout here. We can bring the cable through. This door just opens up. And then if we slide this hard drive cage forward, we're then going to be able to bring the bracket out towards the bottom of the case. So I'm going to test out the length. I'm going to bring it through the lowest setting here. So if I bring the cable up, it actually touches the top of the case. So you're going to have no trouble at all getting this plugged in, and then you can manage the excess cable at the back of the case. So in terms of getting our cables plugged in, we've got a little rubber grommet here. So I'm going to bring an HDMI cable through it and get it plugged into the graphics card. And you'll notice we've got another little rubber grommet at the rear of the case, so we can bring the cable through here and out to the rear. Okay, so that's the GPU installed in the upright position. It's lovely and secure, and I think all the cabling, it actually looks really, really tidy. So a good improvement from the original O11 Dynamic Evo. Certainly in terms of mounting, you could do the whole thing outside the case and then just slot the bracket in. And this 900mm riser cable is certainly long enough to have the cable all the way around the back and out of sight. And the little cutout here makes it look nice and tidy. So the other thing that we can do in this case is actually mount the graphics card upright the other way round, simply by inverting this bracket 180 degrees. So it should be a fairly simple matter of just pressing the bracket up at the top to get this out. We should be able to spin it round, slide the bracket back into place, and there we go. So again, looking in from the back, you can see why we've got this extra length for the riser cable, because you're probably going to want to route this down the side and then in underneath, so keeping it away from the fans. And we do have some cable ties that come with the riser cable to help you organize it. And you can see with it routed all the way around here, there still is going to be loads of the riser cable to actually reach the motherboard. So if you are going upright with the I/O at the bottom, you're going to want to pass your HDMI or DisplayPort cable through to the back of the case through this rubber grommet. We've got this special PCI expansion slot cover bracket to replace the bottom slot. We can bring our cable back in through this bottom cutout and then pass it through the hole in the bracket. So obviously the HDMI cable that I'm using is too big for the hole. So I'll show you what that looks like with a slightly thinner cable, so that one goes through without any difficulty. And again, if that was white to match the colour of the case, I think that would look pretty tidy. Okay, so that's what the GPU looks like in the upright position with the I/O at the bottom. And again, I think the cable running to the back of the case looks nice and tidy as well. Just make sure you match the colour of the cable to the case, because this cable definitely looks better than that one. This is quite a nice upgrade with the XL version of the case, because the only way you could install your GPU with the I/O at the bottom in the original O11 Dynamic Evo was actually to invert the case. There is a big advantage to this. Some cards will not like being in one particular orientation, and the Strix card that I used in my original video did not like being upright with the I/O at the top, but was perfectly happy in the reverse build with the I/O at the bottom. So simply being able to turn it round in a matter of a few seconds is going to be really nice with this case, and you're not actually going to have to invert the whole case if you want the I/O at the bottom. Moving to the case's second compartment, and I think the theme that Lian have gone with here is toolless. So we've got this cable cover door which is magnetically attached. It's just a simple matter of pulling it on this side to open it up. You can see the magnetic attachments we've got here. And one of the nice things about this is it's really strong magnetic attachment. I'm having to give it quite a hard pull to open it. So hopefully when we pack this up with cables, the door isn't going to open up. If we take a look at the back of the door, you can see we've got mounting holes for mounting three 2.5-inch drives here. So to mount your 2.5-inch drives, you're going to want to take one of these rubber grommets and push this long screw through it. You're then going to take your 2.5-inch drive and screw it into the holes on the back. Once you've got it screwed in, it's just a matter of lining things up with the holes in the back and then pushing over towards the side, and that's then going to lock your drive in place. We've also got a nice spot here for the Lian Li Debar badge. Just make sure you know which way you're going to be installing the case. If you're going to be installing it in reverse mode, this is then going to be upside down, and you're going to want to wait until you invert the case and install it this way round. Over towards the rear of the case, we've got two hard drive cages, and these hard drive cages, to get access to them, you just simply need to tilt them out, and you can see that we've got two drive trays in them, and in each of the drive trays you're going to be able to mount either a 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drive. If you look closely at the drive trays, you'll notice we've got some cables coming from them, and if I just trace those cables back, so looking at the cables coming from it, we've got two SATA data cables and one SATA power cable, and this is because this is a hot swappable drive cage. To remove the drive cages, we just need to loosen the thumb screw at the top. We can slide it over to the open position, and then in that position we're going to be able to pull the drive trays out. So because this is a hot swappable drive cage, you're going to have to pay close attention to the orientation, so the connectors are going to line up at the back of the hard drive cage. For the 2.5-inch drives, these are the screws you're going to use in the positions you're going to want to secure the drive in. While with the 3.5-inch drive, there's slightly different screws in a slightly different position. And importantly, you're going to have this little notch facing up the way, because that is the bit that is going to secure the drive in the cage. Then all we need to do is line the drive up with a cage, slide it into place, making sure we get a click at the back as the connectors go into place. And then the same thing with our 2.5-inch drive. Again, making sure we get a click at the end. And then we're going to want to slide this back into the closed position and tighten it up to secure our drives in place, and then we can slide the hard drive cage back into place. If you want to keep your drives running nice and cool, you'll notice there is some fan mounting holes here. We can fit a full 120mm fan, although it is a slim fan that is only 15mm thick. A standard fan is 25mm thick, and it will be too thick for the case to close at the back. We've got these long screws we're going to need to secure it to the bracket. So there we go, with that installed, we're still going to be able to open the drive cage and change the drives out without any difficulty. And the drive cage down at the bottom is just exactly the same as the one at the top in terms of what you can put in it. And again, you are able to mount a fan as well. Another nice thing, if you're not planning on using the drive cages and you want to make more space for your cables, they are removable. You can see there's 4 screws at the back holding each of them in place. Our power supply is going to go here in between the 2 hard drive cages, and you can see the support with a little pad on it that we have for resting our power supply on. And the case is compatible with full-sized ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 220mm. Cable management has always been one of the O11 Dynamic Evo's strengths, and this case is no different. We've got these metal cable brackets with some Velcro cable straps on the front of them. And the idea is your bigger cables, like your power supply cables, you're going to put into these cable brackets. And the smaller cables you're going to then secure in front with these Velcro straps. And if we move the hard drive cage out of the way, you can see we've got more Velcro straps in behind it. So we've got 2 of these little brackets pre-installed, and there's another one in the case accessory box. Just decide where you want it, line it up with the holes, and then push over to the side to lock it into place. And like I say, big cables generally through here, and the smaller cables through the Velcro cable straps. So in terms of the cables coming from the case, we've got 2 USB 3.0 cables. Each one of those will work 2 of the Type A ports in the front, and we've got a single Type C cable for the Type C connector on the front. All our front panel connectors are organised into one nice easy cable, which is great. We've got our HD audio cable. We've got a SATA power connector to control the case's built-in ARGB hub, so make sure you plug this in if you want your ARGB to work. And then to sync our ARGB up with the motherboard, we've got a standard 3-pin 5V ARGB connector. Or if you want to plug it into a Lian Unifan hub, we've got this little connector here which will plug directly into the hub. And now I want to show you how to invert the case. It is important that you remove all the panels, radiator bracket that we have removed so far. The only additional panel for us to remove is this one at the top. There's a little thumb screw at the back, and with it removed we can pull the panel towards us and lift away. Next thing we're going to want to do is free up our USB and HD audio cables by loosening this little clip and putting all the cables through to the bottom. Next at the back of the case, we're going to want to pull this little lever down. And then with the lever pushed down, we just need to pull the bottom of the case backwards. That's going to free it up, and we're going to be able to lift it up and away. To avoid bending the case, we probably should put this pillar back into place at the front. We can then turn the case upside down. We can set the feet back down into place and try and get them lined up. Just going to push down gently on the feet and slide forward to get them to lock into place. We can then pass all our cables through this cutout. Now the only thing you'll notice is our I/O module has moved from the front to the back of the case. I would like to keep it at the front. So I'm just going to lift up here to free it up and then push down. We can bring the I/O module over towards the front, line it up into place and then push down. You'll notice we've got a little hole here to secure the cable onto. We can then slide our bottom dust filter back into place. You'll notice that our power supply support bracket is upside down. The padded bit is up here, and we just need to move it down to these 2 holes here. And then it's just a matter of reinstalling all the panels and fan brackets that we have removed. I'll just remove the tempered glass panels again to give you a better look at things. So to give you a quick orientation of things, your motherboard is going to go here, but it is going to be upside down. Your graphics card is going to be here, and if you want to mount it horizontally, you can do, but again, it is going to be upside down here. And of course, you can use the GPU support bracket with it as well. You're still going to have fan mounting here, here, and at the side. And again, if you want to mount your graphics card in the upright position, you can do it here. So I think the main reasons to do this, so if you want to go with a slightly different looking system, you're certainly going to have it with this. But the big reason is if you want to have your PC sitting on the left-hand side of the desk, then when you look into it, the back is here, the front is here, you're going to be able to see it into the system. Okay, so I'm going to be able to move the case in its standard orientation, so we'll go ahead and put things back in order, and then we'll start work on the motherboard. To open our socket cover, we need to push this lever down and bring it all the way towards the middle of the motherboard, and then we're going to be able to lift the cover up. We can then take our CPU, holding it by the edges, and lower it down gently into the socket. There's little notches at the top and at the bottom which are going to help get the CPU lined up correctly. Once we're happy it's lined up correctly, we can close the socket cover down again, and then to secure it into place we're going to close the lever again. And we'll put the socket cover in the motherboard box for safekeeping. Our Gen 5 slot is this top one, and we're just going to need to remove the heatsink. It's held on with 2 screws. We can then set our drive down into the socket, wiggling from side to side, and then if we flatten the drive down and secure it with the included screw from the motherboard box. If you're using the motherboard from new, there'll be some plastic protection on the back of the heatsink that you're going to need to remove. It is also important to mention that this M.2 SSD comes in a version with a heatsink, and the motherboard also comes with an actively cooled heatsink. It's really beefy and it's got a cooling fan on it. And I had compared the thermals with all of these, as well as the performance of this Gen 5 drive. So if you're interested in finding that out, you find a link to it in the video. The reason I'm going with this heatsink is it does a good enough job of cooling the drive, and it's going to give us the best looking aesthetics. We are now ready to install our RAM, and we're going to install it in the 2nd and 4th slot along from the CPU. So I'm going to open the clips on these slots. We can then line our RAM up with the slot. Once we're happy it's lined up, it's just some firm pressure and it's going to clip into place. Then the same thing with our second stick, line it up with a slot and some firm pressure and it will clip into place. So I'm now going to show you how to install the motherboard, and I'm going to try it out using this removable motherboard tray. So first thing to do is install our GPU support bracket. So I've just kept this assembled from when I showed you it earlier on, so we'll pop it over these 2 standoffs. And because I'm using an EATX motherboard, I'm using the bigger bracket. We've then got these 2 spacers to go over the top. And then we can set our motherboard into place, line it up with the standoffs beneath. And then we can secure the motherboard to the bracket using any of the screws with the little lip around the outside. We can then set the motherboard bracket back into the case and secure it with the thumb screws. So that definitely was easier, securing the motherboard to the bracket on the table, but actually then getting the motherboard tray back into the case was a little bit more difficult. So I think in general I probably would just install the motherboard directly into the case and not use this removable bracket. I think the removable bracket really is more for getting the height right in the case, or if you want to take it out of the case and use it as a test bench. And you can see I've installed the motherboard in the lowest setting. And the reason for that is I want to give you a look at the 2 fans at the back of the case, and this is the only setting that will let you do this. The other thing you could do is of course install your GPU outside of the case as well. Problem with doing that is it is going to block all the ports on the motherboard, and in general I leave this to one of the last things that I would do. Okay, so next thing to do is get our case cables plugged in. Our HD audio cable is going to go into this header down the bottom left hand side of the motherboard. So we can bring the cable through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place. We've got an ARGB header down at the bottom of the motherboard, and we need to plug in our case's ARGB controller into it. And like I've mentioned, you could plug this directly into a Unifan hub, but I'm going to be using all the ports on our Unifan hub and all the USB ports, so we're not going to be able to add an additional one in. So it makes sense just to plug this into the AirGB header at the bottom of the motherboard. Our front panel connectors are going to go to this header down the bottom right hand side of the motherboard. So we can bring our cable through, and Lian have been really nice and combined them all into a single pin for us. And we're going to plug it in with the front panel text facing up the way. So fortunately this motherboard does have two USB 3.0 headers, so all four of the USB Type A ports in the front of the case are going to work. One of them's here, so we'll bring our cable through the cutout, line it up with a header, and push into place, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. And another header is just here on the right hand side of the motherboard, so we'll bring the cable through the GPU support bracket to help organise the cable, line it up with a header and push into place, and then we'll pull the excess cable through to the back. And then our Type-C cable is just immediately below this, so we'll bring the cable through, line it up and push into place, and again pull the excess cable through to the back. We've got 8 SATA ports at the bottom right of the motherboard, and although I'm not planning on installing any SATA drives, it does make sense to plug our ports in at this stage. They're going to be hidden nicely behind our graphics card, and it means if I want to install SATA drives in the future, it's just a simple matter of slotting them into the drive trays, and there's no additional wiring needed to be done. We're now ready to install our power supply, and although our power supply is fully modular, I've gone ahead and plugged the cables that we're going to need. So I've plugged in our 24-pin cable, we've plugged in two 8-pin EPS cables, a 12-volt type power cable, and I've actually plugged in 2 SATA cables. Although we're not installing any SATA drives in the build, we're going to need 2 SATA power cables to power our drive cages. We're going to need one for the case ARGB controller, one for our Lian Unifan controller, and one for AIO. The other thing that I've done is plugged in some white cable extensions. These are completely optional, but they will improve the aesthetics of the build. So we can go ahead and set our power supply into the case. And then we're going to use 4 of the larger screws from the case accessory box to secure the power supply to the case. Our 2 8-pin EPS cables are going to go into these 2 headers at the top left of the motherboard, so we can bring the cables through the cutout, line them up with a header, and push into place. And then we can organise the cables with the included cable combs. And our 24-pin cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll bring it through the cutout, line it up with a header, and push into place. And then again, we've got some cable combs on the cable to help organise it. Then at the back of the case, we're going to want to get our SATA cables plugged in. So we've got the 2 SATA cables coming from our hard drive cage, and the SATA cable coming from our case's ARGB controller. We're now ready to start working on our AIO, and one of the nice things that Lian are doing is they are sending the AIOs out with the fans now installed on them, which is really going to simplify the installation process. So we'll be ready just to put this onto our top bracket. So all we would need to do was set the radiator bracket on top of the AIO and secure it with the short radiator screws. Now, because we're going to have the motherboard set in the bottom setting, I think it is going to look a little bit empty at the top of the case. And I have got loads of Lian Unifans, so I am going to do a push-pull configuration at the top. Main reason for doing so is just to fill that space at the top of the case. So I can then set the radiator bracket on top of both sets of fans. Then I'm going to use some long radiator screws to secure the bracket to the fans to the radiator. So out of the box, our pump comes with an Intel bracket on it. We're going to be installing an AMD motherboard, so we're going to need to remove it. And then it's just a simple matter of sliding our AMD bracket into place. You'll see in our pump we do have this additional slot, and it is for this cable here. And on the end of it, we've just got a standard 3-pin 5-volt ARGB cable. And this is to use if you want the lighting on the pump to sync up with your motherboard. I'm planning on using Lian's L-Connect, so there's no reason to plug this in. It's just going to be one extra cable making the build look untidy. But if you do want the lighting on your pump to be synced up with your motherboard, it is worth plugging this cable in. Another thing to mention is there is 3 options for the aesthetics on the pump. You can change this cover for 2 other ones that come in the box. I'm not going to show you that now. I have covered this in a separate review video, and I'll put a link to that video in the description. So we're now ready to apply the thermal paste to the AIO, and Lian have a special way of doing this. There's a little sticker that we're going to need to put onto the pump. There we go. And it is important that we put it on in the right orientation. This is going to be the up-down orientation, and that's going to be the long axis of our CPU. So it is important that the little dots that we have here are in the same axes. We can then add some thermal paste, and then we just need to spread the thermal paste. Okay, so all we need to do then is peel the plastic protection off. So we're just going to have to take care now that we don't damage this while installing the rest of the AIO. So we're then going to be able to lower our AIO down into the case. And then to secure our bracket at the back, we're just going to simply push it backwards. We can secure the bracket at the top with the 2 screws, and I'm just going to pass our fan cables through to the back. Okay, so the next thing to do is install our pump, so it's just a matter of getting the AMD clips over the stock motherboard brackets. Try and get the one over the bottom as well. There we go, that's them both on, and then it's just a matter of tightening up both the thumb screws together. Now I'm just going to give both a quick tighten with a screwdriver. In terms of the wiring coming from our pump, the first thing we've got a USB cable that's going to go into USB 2.0 header on our motherboard, and we've also got a SATA power cable which is going to go into a SATA cable coming from our power supply. We've also got a 4-pin PWM connector, and that's going to go into our pump header. So I'm going to pass the USB and SATA cable up and through to the back of the case. And you can see at the top of the case we've got our 2 fan headers. We've got our CPU fan header here and our pump header here. So I'm just going to plug the cable coming from our pump into our pump header. And then I'm just going to tuck all the excess cable through to the back. We've got 2 USB 2.0 headers down here at the bottom of the motherboard, so we can route the USB cable coming from our pump through, line it up with the header, and push into place. So you'll notice our Lian logo on the pump isn't straight. It is rotatable, so all we need to do is turn it round to get it in the orientation that we want it. I did mention there is an option to remove these covers, so to do that you turn it midway between the 2 settings and the cover will just pop off. So I'm happy enough, as I said, with the default cover, so I'm just going to leave it here in this orientation. And then at this stage we can remove the plastic protection. And we've also got this little leather strap to help organise the cables on the AIO, so we can go ahead and pop it into place. And then we'll just twist it round. And then at the back of the case we can plug the SATA cable coming from the pump into the SATA cable coming from our power supply. Next thing for us to do is get the fans and the radiator connected up to our Lian Unifan hub. And this hub has 4 channels, 1, 2, 3 and 4. And in each of the channels we get 2 different connectors. And these connectors match up to the fans. So we've got a 4-pin PWM connector we can plug into the first connector in channel 1. And then this is our RGB connector. And that's it plugged into here. So because we have put 2 sets of fans on the radiator, we're going to plug our second set in. So the PWM connector into here. And what you'll notice is the SL-INF Unifans that come separate, they have a 3-pin 5V RGB connector, and obviously it's not going to go into here. But Lian have thought of that, and with the AIO they include this little adapter. So it pushes into here. On the other end we've got a little connector. We remove the protective pins and then we can line it up to here. So there we go, so that's our second fan connected up, and we've got 2 spare channels to connect our other fans up to. So to simplify this process, I'm just going to plug in these little adapters now, because our other case fans are going to be the same. So now I want to come on to the bottom of the hub, and coming from the bottom of the hub we've got a SATA cable. So we're going to need to plug this into a SATA cable from our power supply to power the hub. There's space in the bottom for 2 additional cables. The first is a USB cable, so we'll plug it in. And on the other end we've got a USB 2.0 cable which we need to plug into our motherboard. We need to plug this double cable into the small connector on the other end of the hub. And it's got 2 cables. We've got a 4-pin PWM connector and a 3-pin 5V RGB connector. And the idea behind this is if you plug this cable in and plug them into the appropriate pins on your motherboard, it's going to give you motherboard sync, where your motherboard is going to be able to control the speed of the fans plugged into here and the RGB effects. Alternatively, you can of course leave this cable out and just use Lian L-Connect, but I'll show you plugging it in for completeness. So we'll pass these cables through to the top of the case, and I'm going to plug the 4-pin PWM connector into the CPU fan header here. We've got 2 RGB headers at the top right of the motherboard, so we'll plug the RGB cable into one of these. And then we've got another USB 2.0 header at the bottom of the motherboard, so we'll plug the USB cable coming from the hub into here. Next thing to do is get our case fans installed, and at the bottom and at the side of the case I'm going to be using Lian's new SL-INF reverse fans. So the fan blades you'll notice have actually been reversed, and these are perfect where you want them set to intake, for example at the bottom like this, but you want the good side of the fan showing. Because if we were to use the standard SL-INF Unifans, you can see this fan here, the blades are a different way round. If we were to have this at intake at the bottom, we would have to actually have it installed this way. So this would be the side of the fan that is on display, and I think you'll agree this side looks much better. Again, on the side, we're going to want to have it at intake, and with this fan, it would need to be this way round. With this fan, we can have the good side on display. So to join the fans together, it is really straightforward. It's just a matter of lining them up and then pushing down to lock them into place. And then the same thing here. And again, we're just going to have the one cable to power all three fans, so we can take the connector that comes with the fans and push it down, locking it into place. On the other end of the fans, we're not going to be connecting anything here, so we can just twist these around and remove them. So we can install one set of reverse fans on our bottom fan bracket, again set to intake. So in terms of our side fan bracket, because we're going to have the motherboard centered towards the bottom of the case, I think I'm going to have both of these blanking plates up towards the top. Just a matter of lining them up and clipping them into place. And then we can set our fans onto the radiator. We can then slide our side fan bracket into place. And we can secure it at the back with a thumb screw. We can slide our bottom fan bracket into place. And we'll secure it with the two screws. And we can pass our cables through to the back. And we can slide our bottom dust filter back into place. I've got another two forward-facing Lian Uni fans for the back of the case, so I'm just going to make a start by passing the cables through to the back, and then we can set the fans up and into place. And then we'll get the fans screwed in from the back. Okay, so we just need to get our fans plugged into the Uni fan hub. So we'll start off with our side fans. I'm going to plug them into channel number 3. So that's the PWM connector and our ARGB connector. And then into channel number 4, we've got our bottom fans. So that's our Unifan hub completely full, but we do have one set of fans to plug in. It's our rear fans. So I'm going to plug these directly into our motherboard. So I'm just going to pass them through to the front of the case. And we've got a chassis fan header at the top right of the motherboard. So we'll get the fan plugged into here and another ARGB header just here to get the cable plugged into. We're now ready to install our graphics card, so I'm going to make sure the clip on the top slot in the motherboard is open. I'm then going to open the little cover at the back of the case. And then for this particular motherboard, it's going to be the 3rd and 4th slot cover from the bottom that we're going to need to remove. So I have just sized the graphics card up, and it does look to be quite a tight fit with this GPU support bracket in place, even though it's pushed all the way down to the bottom. So I'm just going to remove it temporarily while we put the graphics card into place. So then we can line the graphics card up with the slot. And once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the graphics card and it is going to clip into place. There's no screws needed to secure the graphics card. All we need to do is close this door and that's going to hold it in place. So you can see with this little bracket all the way down at the bottom, it is really quite tight under there. I'm just going to try and slide it back in with the graphics card in place. So I can get it back in, but rather than actually supporting the graphics card, it's actually lifting the graphics card up, so it's tilting it out of place. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove this. So rather than use the bracket, I've cut the little rubber pad in half, and I'm just going to set it directly onto where the graphics card is resting. So there we go, that's our graphics card being supported and nice and straight. We can then bring our 12 volt high power cable through the cutout at the bottom and we'll get it plugged into our graphics card. There we go, and it's important to make sure we get a nice click when we plug it in. And then we'll just use the cable combs on the cable to help organize it. So just before we get on to cable management, there's one thing I'm not quite happy with. I've installed these fans onto the recessed side of this bracket, so they're sitting back into the cutout, which doesn't look good because you can see the cables running here and this big cutout here. So I'm going to turn the bracket round, bringing the fans further forward into the case, and that's going to give us a better look at the RGB effects on the side of them as well. Okay, so I think you'll agree that looks so much better. We can no longer see the cables or the cutout at the side, and we've got a lovely view of the side of these fans as well. The only other thing to mention, you probably noticed during the build I've had this pillar removed for most of it. The only time I put it back in was when I was inverting the case. It probably is a good idea to leave this pillar in during the build. I don't think it's going to obstruct the building process, but it is just going to provide a little bit of support. And then the only time you need to remove it is shortly before you put the tempered glass panel back in. And the tempered glass panel is then going to provide support to the top of the case while it's there and the pillar's not. But actually with this push-pull configuration at the top, you can notice there is a little bit of sag on the top panel. So leave this panel in and just take it out at the last minute when you're about to put the panels back on again. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management so we can get the side panels back on again. So that's the build complete, and I think it looks absolutely amazing. I've gone ahead and set the PC up off camera because I've done setup guides using all these components before and I don't want to repeat things. This video was already long enough. So if you don't know how to install Windows, the drivers, the RGB software, adjust all the BIOS settings, I'll put a link to another video which covers all of that. In terms of this new AIO, I've made a full review of the performance version, and that's going to cover setting everything up in Lian Li's L Connect. So if you don't know how to do that, again, you'll find a link to that video in the description. What I'm planning on doing now is some thermal testing, and then I'll be back with the case review. So you want to find out what I thought about this case, you're going to want to check that out. And again, you'll find a link to that video in the description. So hopefully you have enjoyed this video. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.